I'm so excited to be here, and it is great to see some friendly names there in the chat. If you've just arrived, we're sharing where you're from. And Kian, it's been so great to get to know you through this process. I've already learned so much from you about AI, and I know I'm going to learn a lot more along the way. So we actually want to start by hearing from you, all of you. So we have a poll that we want to share just to get a sense of where your organization is at in terms of AI adoption. So the wonderful Olivia is going to bring up the poll, and we'll get some feedback. So, what do you see as the biggest challenge in AI adoption at your organization? Is it limited technical skills? Is it unclear business value? Or is it change management gaps like low employee buy-in, lack of training, or cultural issues? Now, I know many of you could say, well, it's all three, but we're actually forcing you to choose what the top one is. So, we'll give folks a few minutes to answer this poll.
Bill, how many cups of coffee are you in today?
Oh, this is I do two a day because
Oh, wow.
research suggests that two a day may actually be good for you. So
Okay.
that's I love, as you've gotten to know me, I love research. You know, having degrees in mathematics and computer science, I love the analytics and then, combining that with people. All right, I feel like, Olivia, that's probably good enough time for the results. Let's see how the group voted. Okay, so 31% was a good mix, said limited technical skills, 29% unclear business value, and 40% said change management gaps.
It's
Yeah,
really
based on your experience, what's your thought on that?
it's really interesting. It's pretty evenly spread out, and I would say it just depends on sort of where your company is on the AI journey. And
Mhm.
so I would say that if you are very early on the AI journey, you might say that my company doesn't have the right technical skills. If you're sort of been experimenting for a while, playing around, you're like, I don't really know what the ROI is, so that you might be thinking about unclear business value. And then, if you're really trying to do wide scale adoption, you're like, why are people adopting it? And that's really a change management issue. And so I think we're seeing here in this poll many different kinds of companies in this webinar, which is great. I think one of the biggest challenges on the technical side is that people think AI is really technical and hard. And actually, it's actually when we talk about generative AI and conversational AI, it's very easy to learn. And there was some really interesting research that came out earlier this year from LinkedIn that surveyed thousands of employers worldwide and said 71% of them would rather hire for AI skills than hire for experience. So
Mhm.
AI is really deeply desired. But here's the flip side of all these thousands of companies, only about 39% of them are offering AI training. And so there's
Mm.
like this mismatch. So it's natural if you're early on the adoption curve to be like, I don't have the right kind of skills. And if you're trying to figure out like, okay, I played around, but really, what is the ROI? How do I measure all this investment? Is it going to have value for me, or is it just like another technology tool that is a hot fad? And so
Mm.
I think all of those are true. It's just very reflective on where people are on the AI adoption curve. And we see a lot of people from across the spectrum here today.
Yeah, that's an interesting, thanks, Kian. That's an interesting survey about kind of, who would they rather hire? I mean, I would add in, there's AI skills, experience, and then emotional intelligence, leadership, personal leadership capability. I mean, in our world, that's actually the thing you want to hire, number one for, and then, maybe the other two, but that's interesting. Um, so, I know we've worked with a company. So I want to start by sharing a story of where AI adoption. They ran into some challenges, but they were able to overcome them. So Mercy is a healthcare hospital and healthcare system in the Midwest. 52,000 employees, or they call them
Awesome.
caregivers.
Hmm.
And so I'm actually going to read the story because I want to get it right. So Mercy wanted to use AI to help with the transfer or handoff of medical information and the health status of patients moving from the emergency room to inpatient wards. So they wanted to have AI create standardized automated summaries for the nurses and doctors to discuss and reference after the transfers. And I bet everyone here has had that experience of seeing one healthcare professional, then going to another one, and it's like, do you even know that I saw this other person? Did you get any of the notes? And like, did you even read them? Or did they like, so I think we've all had that experience of where that doesn't work. So, for them, not only could AI do a great job of summarizing relevant information for this medical visit, and perform a more accurate handoff, but this is a case where AI would also help ensure that the practice would occur. Because let's face it, humans in hospitals get very busy. And so there were times when it wasn't happening, which obviously positively impacts patient safety and allows the nurses and doctors to have more time. Okay, so that was kind of the AI use case. The challenge was is when the nurses first heard about it, they had all the natural fears of the unknown. Were they trying to replace my job? Number one thing, right? They're trying to replace me. Wait, what about patient privacy issues? If it's in the AI, it's going to be out there in the world. And even worried that the summaries would be inaccurate and AI would hallucinate, which is a term I had not heard before. So, Kian, before I go on explaining kind of what they did about this, so these nurses had all these concerns. What is AI hallucination?
Hallucination is when an AI language model makes things up. And just think of AI as the world's best golden retriever. It's algorithmically designed to give you the answer it thinks you want to hear. So it is designed to make you happy with an answer. And if it doesn't have the answer to a question that you ask it, oftentimes it doesn't want to say it doesn't have the answer, so it will make it up, which may not be factual. And that's called a hallucination.
Wow, I had never heard that term. I mean, now that I've heard it, makes sense. So again, you can imagine that in transferring patient diagnosis and treatment information, you don't want the AI making something up. So rather than just kind of pushing forward and saying, "Oh, this is what we're doing," nurses go for it. They actually gathered key representatives from the nurses, listened to and addressed their concerns by number one, focusing on the value drivers. That second part in the survey, what's the business case for this? So the number one was actually giving them more time for patient interaction,
Mhm.
more accurate notes, and ensuring the handovers would actually happen. And then they co-developed the solution with them to make sure it worked the way it needed to. So it wasn't just, here it is, go. And they've seen that because of that process, they've seen a very high adoption, and up to 45 minutes of time per 12-hour shift has been reallocated to patient care. I mean, think of the value of that. Think of the positive impact that has. And in fact, it went so well that now the nurses are demanding that it be used in all handoffs, from bedside to psych. And it's actually the nurses and doctors that are now driving the AI adoption. So congratulations, Mercy. You guys have been awesome. Love your innovation and kind of blending culture with AI, and in a way that is having a positive impact on humans.
Bill, this is like actually a great example because you said the nurses were afraid of AI. And I don't think AI is it's not some big, hairy thing that we should be afraid of. AI will help us augment our human action. AI is not a tool that's going to displace humans. However, humans who know how to use AI will displace other humans who don't know how to use it. And so the fear has, I think, unfortunately been created by the media. And of all the major G20 countries in the world, the United States has the highest fear of AI. And that's actually driven, I think, by the media. So my job in my work in training teams and helping organizations learn about AI is all about demystifying it so they learn that they can integrate it into their workflow. Now, with this example with the nurses, this is a perfect example of how they started incorrectly, right? Like they just said, okay, you're gonna use this technology and it's gonna make you be more productive. Whereas, okay, so we have the technology, but then they forgot about the human element, and the human element is actually really, really critical. And what most companies make a mistake on when they're thinking about building culture that adopts AI, they think that AI is an IT issue. AI is not an IT issue, people. AI is a people issue. So the worst that you can do is to think about AI as sort of like adopting the latest iPhone or software in your company. That's totally not what AI is about, at least successful implementation of AI. AI is about change management. It's about how humans interact with it. It's how we change our human workflows to use AI as a co-partner in our work. It's really a people issue. So it involves training, it involves upskilling, it involves leadership communication, all the things that ultimately Mercy Hospital realized they had to do with the nurses in order to get them to adopt this technology. And to really transform like your organization, you need to have great internal communicators, teachers, trainers, facilitators, culture coaches. So what if you take one thing away from this conversation is that successful adoption of AI is not an IT issue. It is really a people and change management issue. And finally, Mercy was able to get to that, thankfully.
They were. By the way, another great example is, and I know we have a couple clients on the line who work with sales teams
Mhm.
and sales organizations. And we have a sales organization at IHHP, and some of the uses are incredible because I've tried it. Like, let's say you want to, try to reach out to a client to try to explain the value of your offering. You can literally go into, chat GPT-4 and say, write me an email, introducing our solution to Dave at ABC Company, and why and how it would benefit him. And AI is amazing. It will actually go out and it will like read shareholder reports, read their LinkedIn posts, read articles they've written, find and create this incredible, kind of summary of things that are really relevant. What's happening in the business, change happening in the organization. Now, I'm not saying what it writes is like, hey, that's perfect. Click send. You still have to take it, and a human still has to craft it.
That's right.
But the information it gathers on that person in the company as a salesperson, it would take you hours. And by the way, you wouldn't even be able to get all of it.
You
But
should
what I
check
know from sales organizations is that some salespeople are like, they're kind of, oh, I don't know how to do this, and I'm afraid of it, and I don't want to. And so again, it's that like, it's that easy, yet it's really difficult because of the uncertainty.
Yeah, one of the coolest sales tools with AI is a program called Crystal Knows, like crystal ball knows the
Hmm.
future, Crystal Knows. It can actually go on, let's say, your target audience's LinkedIn and be able to read that and get a better understanding from a
Yep.
personality perspective of how your target client might react. And so when you, as a human, as a salesperson, are going in to have a conversation with your future partner or client, you have a little bit more insight as to how their personality might react to something. So there's just so many use cases of AI of how it can help us. I would say, AI can really do two things very well. One is helping us create efficiencies in how we work. And so these are sort of like low-hanging fruits of how we automate repetitive workflows, similar to how the nurses no
Mercy.
longer had to transcribe and pass the notes on. So this sort of like efficiency and productivity gains is one big bucket. And then the second bucket is how AI can help us actually come up with new ideas, new creative solutions to problems that we have. And so my research is really focused on the second bucket around how do we think about AI to help us augment our human creativity. So 1 + 1 actually equals 3 rather than, the right mathematical answer. And so
Hmm.
these two buckets are really powerful tools, and they can be applied to any industry and any sector. Now, we're here a conversation about culture, and this is the stuff that is the hardest part for a lot of IT tech adoption is that they forget the culture element of it. And so there's so many things that we can think about. How do we help people put together different components of initiatives that allow their companies to go from either zero or no awareness of AI to limited awareness to finally piloting, experimenting, scaling, and all of that is a huge change transformation initiative.
But by the way, I love this. I just happened to check the chat. We actually have, hi, I'm an AI assistant helping Yossi Hassan take notes for this meeting. I
Yeah.
love that. That's what, could that be any better? Alrighty, so Kian, that's a perfect segue into kind of where we want to go next, which is culture going hand in hand with AI adoption. And so I'm actually going to share a couple slides because I want to talk about some of IHHP's work in the area of culture. And so we talk about building an innovative last 8% culture. Now, what do we mean by the last 8%? Well, the last 8% is the difficult stuff we have to do. There's the 92% where it's easy. I know what I'm doing. But then there's the stuff where you're taking a risk. You're trying something new. You don't know how it's going to work out. You might fail. It might waste time. Or it could be a difficult conversation. Like you said, pushing back on IT because they want to own it, or so it's all about the difficult stuff. And we focus on the last 8% because of the cortisol effect. When there is tension, when there is pressure, cortisol gets released, which causes memories to sear in. So people remember how you showed up in those difficult moments. So that's actually where culture is established. So, for example, in the Mercy case, the nurses reacting negatively and the fear of AI, that was the last 8% moment for them. And again, how Mercy handled that was very emotionally intelligent. They created psychological safety. They created an environment where the nurses, where they addressed those concerns. So that's what the last 8% is. I just want to share a little bit more about culture. And one of my favorite quotes about culture comes from a really good client of ours and somebody who I consider to be a friend now. His name is Vern Steiner, and he's the CEO at the California State Compensation Insurance Fund. They have 4,000 employees. And he says, all change is enabled or disabled by culture. It begins there. And this is the part I love. If you start thinking about culture when you are ready to implement AI, it's going to be harder. So what he's suggesting is
Too
if you're
late.
thinking about AI adoption, you should be thinking about culture at the same time. Kian, you're smiling at that quote.
Yeah, it's just too late. If you're only starting to think about culture when you're thinking about AI adoption, you've already missed the boat.
Yeah, well, or it's going to be a lot harder. So I'm going to talk about culture now. As I'm talking about it, I hope all of you are going to be thinking about the culture on your team, whether you're the leader of the team or you're on a team, the culture of your organization, and is it ready? Where is it in terms of readiness for adopting AI? And there's two pillars of a high performance culture. One is what we call high connection, high psychological safety. And most organizations and people, when they do values work, when they do culture work, they focus on this. And it's absolutely critical because you need people engaged. You need people trusting, right? Trust is a big thing in AI. If people don't trust how it's getting used, they'll resist. So
Mhm.
that's critical. The and is there's a second pillar that most organizations forget, and that's high courage.
Mhm.
That's the ability to skillfully do hard things, for people to challenge each other, for people to take risks and try new things, to innovate, right? High performance requires risk. Innovation requires risk to maybe to fail, to make a mistake. So we need both these things in a high performance culture.
One thing I'll add to this is around high connection. When we're thinking about integrating AI into our workplace, because it's fairly novel technology, people don't know a couple of things about it. A, they don't know if it's making things up. Then people don't know how it makes decisions. It's sometimes in a black box.
Yeah,
And so I think it's really critical. You mentioned one word, which is trust.
yeah,
And when we're thinking about using AI in the workplace, trust is really critical because we need to make sure that we create right kinds of ethical guidelines and that AI is being used for good. And
yeah.
so making sure we address that early in the process is super important. Otherwise, people won't feel comfortable with the technology and they won't use it effectively.
I mean, that's a really good point, Kian, because there are some examples where there were some biases built into AI's decision making around hiring or other things. And so absolutely, that needs to be taken into account because as you say, we want it used for good. So that's a great example. All right, so we took these two pillars, connection and courage, and we created a culture map. And a number of you are going to maybe even want to take a picture of this once I finish it, and you're welcome to. I'm also going to tell you how you can get a copy of this culture map and even an exercise you can do with your team at the end. All right, so on this map, the last 10% culture map, we on the left axis is courage, on the bottom axis is connection. So think about a culture that's on the top left. It's high in courage, but low in connection. That's a more transactional culture. Results matter over relationships. We talk about it being as more of a blame, make a mess environment. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when something goes wrong, when someone's frustrated, they're sending emails blaming people, they're getting frustrated, right? They're impacting each other, they're not, they're being disrespectful. Kian's laughing. I mean, I think we've all
I don't
been
know
there.
anybody like that.
I don't know anybody like that, right? In this culture, you endure toxic bad apples because they get high performance. But I've made this mistake as a leader. I spent 14 years at a computer software company as a leader. of allowing, a high performing salesperson who got results but left bodies in their wake, leaving that unaddressed versus coaching up or coaching out. What I've learned is that one bad apple, one toxic person can derail the performance of a team by 30 to 40%. So again, that can impact your team's adoption of AI. The challenge group thing is people are afraid to speak up. So the good news in Mercy was the nurses felt safe to speak up. Imagine if they didn't feel safe, but then they passively resisted, the meeting after the meeting to talk about what they didn't agree with in the meeting. So that
Toxic.
happens a lot. That did not happen at Mercy. You're laughing, Kian.
Yeah, so
Um,
toxic.
it's a high anxiety, high burnout culture. It actually can get some results over the short term, but it's not sustainable over the long term. Okay, let's think about the bottom right, where it's high connection but low courage. That's a family culture. That's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things. They're unwilling to step into the last 8% moments, say that last 8% of a tough conversation. It is more of an avoidance culture. There's less accountability, there's lower standards. So, even in an AI rollout, where there's an expectation that, all the salespeople will try to adopt this, what's the accountability? I mean, yes, you have to engage them, but there also has to be an accountability. It's slower decision making because we have to get everybody to agree, everybody's got to be happy, and there's nothing wrong with consensus decision making, but taken too far can really slow things down. And finally, the trap group thing is people are hesitant to speak up because they don't want to upset others. They want to be liked. Now, there are a lot of positive things about a family culture. It tends to be high care. There does tend to be trust, but we always say you're not actually a family. You can't fire your lowest performing kid. You might want to some days. By the way, I have two teenage daughters. So some days, maybe, but you aren't in fact a family. Kian, any thoughts on kind of, a family type culture? Because I will say, the lion's share in our research, 30%, 37% of organizations fall into family culture. So it's the most common. And of our clients, it's probably even a little bit higher because they're the type of folks that choose to work with us. What's your thoughts about kind of AI adoption in a family culture?
Well, I actually work with many privately owned family-held companies.
Literally
Um,
families. Yep.
Yeah, and so they're not mom and pop shops. They tend to be, mid-sized, privately held, family-owned conglomerates. And the everything you say is true. The flip side of that is that because they are family-owned, if you get alignment amongst the family stakeholders, then the path to adoption can be significantly faster.
Yes.
Because they say, okay, we want to experiment, we want to do this, and it's less of a bureaucratic environment to try to get something extraordinary done. So everything you say is true, but if you work with the right type of family company, they can actually be very quick to adopt a technology or change management for effort if they believe in it and the senior family stakeholders think, yes, this is the future.
Yeah, and you're right. And we always say connection comes before courage.
Hmm.
I think, and so you want exactly what you're talking about in a culture. I think where it can break down is when you really want to be a high performance culture, and so underperformers aren't being addressed.
Hmm.
People aren't being held accountable. So you start with engagement, you start with the trust, you start with that, but they're also, the organizations are there to drive strategy, to execute, right? And so I think that tends to be what's missing in a family culture. And it can sometimes the taking risk piece is missing. Again, you're laughing. What are you thinking?
I'm just laughing because I'm just imagining like if my parents owned a family owned business and they'd say, "What is your strategy, Keon, for making this grow in the next 2 years?" That just wouldn't work well for me if I heard that as a family member saying, "What is your strategy for making
Yeah,
this happen?"
yeah. All right. So, bottom left, low courage and low connection. We see a lot less of this these days. That's your old fear-based command and control culture. There isn't great risk taking because everything's top down. It's micromanaged. It's very inconsistent behavior, and lots of bad apples. The North Star, where you want to get to in order to drive AI adoption and drive high performance, is the upper right-hand quadrant. That's a last 8% culture where they're connected, there's trust, but they're doing the difficult thing. So it's characterized by high accountability and high care. It's high trust and smart risk taking. So again, people feel safe to take risks because of the trust. It's a feedback rich environment, and it isn't just leaders or managers giving feedback to employees. It's peers giving feedback to each other. And by the way, if you're leading a team and the peers are holding each other accountable, that's a beautiful thing because then you don't have to do it as the leader. But it's also leaders managing up. There's something many of you may have heard of called CEO's disease, where the higher up you go in an organization, the less candid feedback you get. So if an AI adoption isn't working, if you're spending millions of dollars and it's not having the impact, nobody wants to tell anybody because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to have a mistake pointed out. So the feedback has to flow in all directions. There's a balance of results and relationships. So it's not one or the other. And finally, it's high experimentation, high innovation, which you need in order to adopt in any digital transformation, like whether it's AI or any digital transformation you're doing, this is what you need. Kian, any thoughts on that culture map?
I think it's right on the money. Honestly, being able to experiment is critical to this world of business where things move so quickly, especially with the world of AI. And that's really critical. And then also having the kind of workplace environment where actually when you run experiments, most of the times they don't work out. And that's
Yeah,
seen as a feature rather than as a bug. And so having that kind of high trust environment where people can run really hard, fast towards hard problems and being able to experiment is really key.
yeah. And we actually have an assessment, so we can assess an organization. And what's really interesting is when we break it down by departments or levels, you see different cultures on different teams because culture doesn't exist across organizations. Culture exists on individual teams.
Hmm.
So the good news for everyone on the line here, that means you can own the culture in your team. Whether you're the leader or you're a contributor on the team, you can have an impact. You can own the culture in your team. You can raise difficult to discuss issues. By the way, in our assessment, one of the behaviors that most teams or organizations score lowest on is people are willing to name inconvenient truths, difficult to discuss issues on our team. That's hard, but you all know what happens if that inconvenient truth isn't named. Then it just sits out there, it gets unaddressed, it can become toxic, right? We need those things being brought up. That's a last 8% culture where people are able to name inconvenient truths. That again, like things that can impact an AI adoption. Okay, so what we want to do actually is now bring up our second poll, and we want to hear from all of you. Where do you think the team that you work on and your organization? Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. Olivia, take that one down. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to the chat because I did forget to do this as a poll. My fault. So I'd like everyone to go to the chat and just put in the chat. Oh, by the way, I love that Greg has already said sometimes we're like a dysfunctional family. Hi, Greg, by the way. Good to see you. Totally get it. Where in the chat, but where do you see the team that you're on? Not a team you lead if you're a leader, but the team that you're on with your peers and your manager. Where do you see that team on this culture map? Is it transactional? Is it fear-based? Is it, a family, or is it last 8% culture? So I'm gonna have everyone go to the chat and just throw in kind of what do you think? Where's your team at? Okay, we got family, we got last 8%, we got family, transactional. Yep, we got some more family. Last 8%, right? Oh, we have a fear-based. That's always challenging. Family, but dysfunctional family. Yusuf, thank you. Transactional, middle-ish, moving toward last 8%. Great. I love that there's progress being made. It says family, more unwilling to do the hard things sometimes. And yeah, I mean, this isn't every time, all the time. It's always a certain way, but just in general, how does your organization lean? How does your team lean? Just pulling out of family in the last 8%. Transactional but shifting. Awesome. All right, so you get the sense, people are kind of all over the place. And in our work, again, let me make sure I get these numbers right. I might not get these numbers right, but it's approximately 20% that are in transactional, only 12% in fear-based, 37% in family, and 33% in last 8% culture. And by the way, if those numbers don't add up to 100, don't hold me accountable. It's approximately those numbers. What I do know from a lot of clients is where they are in a last 8% culture, a lot of times they're just over the line on courage. So they're not way up in the upper right. So even though there's 33% that are in last 8% culture, a big number of those, probably 20% out of that 33%, really courage is really their opportunity to continue to grow and get better. So that's absolutely critical. All right, Olivia, now let's bring up the other poll. That was totally my mistake. By the way, acknowledging and owning a mistake. That's an example of a high performance behavior. Okay, so we want to hear from you. How prepared is your organization to hand the cultural shift required to adopt AI adoption? And again, making it really simple. You're very prepared, you're somewhat prepared, or you're really not prepared. You got a lot of work to do.
I want to talk all about this cultural signals and the events and the processes that allow teams and companies to adopt AI. This is like my favorite part.
Awesome. Okay, let's get the results of the survey and we'll get to that because I love that part too. Okay, so again, I mean, we only have 50% very prepared, but a lot in somewhat and not prepared. Wow, 86% are either somewhat or not prepared. Kian, does that jibe with? I'm gonna take us off the PowerPoint for now. Oh, actually, you know what? No, I wanted to share one quote. One more quote. Let me go back to that. Nope, there it is. All right. So the last quote I wanted to share on culture comes from Sarah Sewell from Stanford. She said, "Culture is like the wind. It is invisible, yet its effects can be seen and felt. When it's blowing your direction, it makes for smooth sailing. When it's blowing against you, everything is more difficult." So, Kian, as you see that, those numbers, 86% of people, are either somewhat or not prepared. What's your thought on that? What are you seeing in organizations?
Again, it's because they think the IT department should own AI, and increasingly, a lot of mid to large size companies, people are creating AI task forces led by IT department because the chief information officer is responsible for buying the software. They think they own it, and it's all just being done incorrectly. Whereas it really should be a partnership, and increasingly in the domain of the HR department. And so that's why I think most companies aren't prepared. I mean, I think there's a few things that companies can do to think about building the right kind of culture. I mentioned earlier, the first one is you got to develop the right kind of ethical guidelines and be very transparent about it. Like, what domains will we use AI to help us accomplish at work? Who makes the decisions? And what's off limits, what's in bounds. So like, I think it's really important that leaders have that conversation. And most companies don't even begin to do that. The other really big problem is that all of a sudden now, we've got these large language models and people say, okay, go use any of these tools to be more effective. And so managers and employees kind of like feel forced to try something, but they're intimidated. They don't have training to do it. And so the way we suggest actually to really adopt AI and want to use it is to really create room for experimentation. And we know from our research that if you're not having fun, you're not going to actually adopt a particular technology or approach. So we always recommend to begin by experimenting a little bit with your employees and staff. And what I mean by that is, instead of telling Sally to go automate some HR function, say, hey, Sally, what are you really interested in? Like, what excites you? Is it like travel? Is it like cooking? Is it like books? Why don't you actually have a personal conversation with AI about something that you really care about? Because then that'll actually give you a spark as to, oh, AI can help me plan my itinerary for my trip to Mexico. Wow, I wonder if it can help me plan this particular activity at work. And so we want you to actually have fun with it, because if you think it's work, then it's drudgery and no one wants to do it. It's like adopting your latest CRM. Nobody really wants to go through a training program, right? And so I think it's critical that companies first create space for experimentation and having fun. And what's really also important is using inclusive language. And what I mean by that is that the CEO, the managers, the leadership, they got to be in it all in together. And they got to say, we are going to experiment together and we are going to learn together, so that employees don't feel like this fear that this top-down technology is going to come and replace them. We worked with a major fashion company CEO to help her adopt AI, and then we taught her how to actually create Loom videos of her using AI, and then she would send these videos out to the entire company. And then all of a sudden, this lowered the threshold and the anxiety level for people, because they said, hey, if the CEO is using AI, I can use AI. And she's experimenting and she's having fun with it, then that gives me permission to play around. So these are just like very unmistakable cultural cues. Or we can talk about sort of like the more practical, like event nuts and bolts and events that you could do.
I love those little like hacks, little tactical strategies, because
Human behavior hacks, the only way.
sometimes when people approach something, oh, we got to adopt AI, it feels too big. So to give some of those little hacks, another, I think, a great example of a thing. And by the way, Nicole, I appreciate that you said that, you 100% need leadership buy-in. And by the way, Craig asked if I would bring the quote up again, so I'll just share that momentarily. That is isn't that a great quote? So I'll share that, whether you want to write it down or take a picture or screenshot. I think, and Sarah Sewell did some really great work at Stanford on the impact of culture. And I think, again, this speaks to whatever strategy you're trying to, whether it's a growth strategy, whether it's a, cost containment strategy, whether it's a digital transformation or AI, culture enables strategy execution. And we're really clear that you don't do culture just to be nice, just to create a nice culture. That's a benefit, but you do culture in order to execute strategy. And so by creating a high psychologically safe, high connection environment that then also has the courage and the accountability, that's how you really drive performance. So Craig, I hope you either wrote that down or got a picture of it. If not, we can send it to you later. So I want to share another example of kind of a bit of a, what are some things, organizations can do to create that kind of environment. And I'm going to go back to Vern Steiner from the state, California State Compensation Insurance Fund. So they are an insurance provider of workers' compensation. And he said, like any organization, we have pockets of people who want to move fast and are willing to take risks and try new things. And then we have the people who think AI is a threat and that everything about it is wrong and dangerous. And there's everyone in between. We operate in a highly regulated environment, and the regulation that is coming in AI is not clear yet. Moving fast and taking risks in areas that are likely to intersect with regulation is taking too much risk. So again, in this sort of risk scenario, there can be there's two ends of it, right? There's the people who are uncertain, don't want to take risk, resist, and there's the people who move too fast. Identifying opportunities in relatively low risk areas and engaging everyone in an ongoing discussion about what we were doing and why we are doing it and how it will impact them is the best way to move forward. So again, so there's like, he basically, start with some simple things, start with, engage everyone in the discussion, clarify the business value, the why. It's like the nurses. Hey, this is going to help you have more time to spend with patients and less time doing menial labor. And what he said was, and this is the part I really love, he said, we have an all hands meeting every 6 to 8 weeks. Now, all hands is 4,000 employees. Not that all 4,000 show up every time, but it's open to all 4,000 employees every 6 to 8 weeks to share their progress and answer questions.
Great.
Talk about engaging people. Talk about involving, addressing concerns, creating a psychologically safe environment, communicating really clearly. All the leadership team are there. They're bought in and owning it. And maybe for your organization, 6 to 8 weeks is too often. But at some frequency. And it also demonstrates, how seriously the organization leadership are taking AI adoption.
Absolutely. This continuous learning is super, super important. So you have formal training capabilities, and those are sort of like necessary to get the organization going. Part of our work is helping companies learn AI literacy skills at all levels of the organization, from senior level down to manager to individual contributor. So you got to start out with that like baseline, let's learn these skills. And if you want to learn some more of those capabilities, you can go to learnabc.ai. I'm happy to share with you some more information there on some of our training programs. So you got to start out with some of these formal training programs. But then you mentioned, Bill, like these continuous learning. and this example of how this company brings people together every 4, 6, 8 weeks to learn. We actually worked with a major educational content company to uncover a new revenue stream that generated multi-millions of new revenue for them, and
Wow.
through this kind of training program. And one of the things that we suggested to them was that they create an alumni program of those people who've gone through these training activities for them to meet up every so often, to have monthly share outs of what are their works in progress, what are they learning. So now you have created this peer-to-peer learning environment where people are, again, lowering the barriers to experiment. They're seeing what works. They're getting encouraged to find new use cases. And this is actually a very specifically and intentionally designed change management strategy. It's not just something that you throw against the wall and say, hey, just go at it. You have to think through your AI change management as a strategy and then design these events and experiences to then ultimately get to the point where you get that full-on adoption by those nurses at Mercy Hospital.
Yeah. I love that. Kian, we have a couple questions that come in. So Jeff has said we are divided. Marketing is 100% in, parts department is 70% in, and other departments cannot see what AI will do for them. It feels like some of the suggestions you've already made will help like that for those other departments. As you said, get people engaging with AI with something that isn't just about work, something that they're interested in. So that seems like a good idea.
Yeah, and one of the other things I'd say is for those maybe who are maybe unsure of the productivity or value of AI, one of the things I'd strongly recommend is create these wow learning moments, like a show and tell. So we work with a major NBA team. Actually, they're all major, so that's kind of redundant. But an NBA team and their HR team
Well,
to
Sacramento, maybe not so much.
I can't divulge who it is.
Sorry to any Sacramento fans, by the way, but let's face it, you're not LA or New York.
And so we worked with this NBA team's HR team department to help encourage and incentivize and inspire people to use AI. So we created a series of lunch and learns and these show and tells where people would come and
Love
show
that.
a use case of how they actually experimented with it. And people were like, "Oh, wow, okay, I can do that." So for that question for the audience member who said, there are some people in my company who are maybe not on the AI bandwagon. So one way you can help them learn more is to, again, lower the barriers to experimentation, have these peer-to-peer learning environments, a lunch and learn, so that people can see, okay, yeah, I can apply that to my particular require a whole lot of money in change management.
Gotcha. By the way, I love that idea, not only to kind of inspire the people who aren't comfortable adopting AI, but for that person who's going to share that in that lunch and learn, what a great opportunity. And a lot of times these are younger people. So I want to call out somebody who is actually here with us, Olivia, who is this wonderful young person, has been doing a whole bunch of stuff with us in AI around writing blogs and not having it write the blogs, but having it gather information, structure things, and then once you write the blog, you can say, make it more concise, make it more impactful, and it's amazing what it can do. And by the way, the webinar description that we came up with, Kian, AI helped us write it. So we came up with you and I came up with the initial outline and what we want to do. And, we put some notes down. We said, AI, make this more targeted, make this more concise. And it really, I was like, oh my God, what it came back with was so much better than anything I ever would have been able to do, even if I spent 5 hours on it. So yeah, AI can be really amazing. Okay, we have another question. Question that came in. What have you found in your research about how organizations' culture shift during times of extreme stress? Market downturns, mergers. Under ideal condition, they maybe last 8%, but under stress, shift to transactional or fear-based, and how they can avoid that negative shift. Um, that is a great point. Ironically, because I've been at IHHP now for 22 years, so I've been through SARS, I've been through the 2008 downturn, COVID, of course, and a million things in between. Typically, you're right. When organizations get under pressure, they do move to the more tactical, and sometimes they lose sight of that's actually the time that it's most important to connect with people because they're uncertain, they're feeling fear, they're worried about their jobs. So many times leaders and organizations do the exact opposite of what you should do when you're under pressure. And that is really the work that we do with organizations. Now, that's not to say you don't need to make tough decisions. You don't need to take quick action. So again, it's really about finding that balance where, yeah, you're doing some transactional things, but it's still with care. It's still with connection and trust. Kian, you have any thoughts? I really like that question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we did this major research during the pandemic with 2,000 teams all across the world to try to understand in the biggest time of uncertainty in our lives, what made some of the teams very successful and others not. Like you said, some of them became transactional or fear-based, but then there were some who really outperformed. And that was a subject of research that was published by Harvard a couple of years ago, actually, in my book, Competing in a New World of Work. And what we found is that the teams that were the most successful weren't the ones that, like you said, were fear-based or leaning into transaction, but they had adopted behaviors that allowed them to become really agile and adaptable. And those behaviors are things that we as humans can learn. And now we're sort of in this next era of that, of like, okay, how do we become adaptable working with AI? Because it is going to be with us forever on and out in our lives, in our working lives.
Yeah. Love it, love it. So Nicole is asking, what do you what impact does age have on kind of AI adoption? Because I know I'm an older fellow, and absolutely in the beginning I was like, oh, I don't know how to use this. I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I have degrees in mathematics and computer science. I used to be a program. I used to code COBOL programs. Yet I at first found it intimidating. What are you seeing in terms of kind of impact of age?
I think what you say is very common. AI adoption follows a typical age distribution curve. So younger Gen Z workers, millennials are much more comfortable using with it versus older Gen X even and boomer folks who are still in the workforce. But here's what I would say is that AI is not a technical thing for you to learn. AI is a language. So we as humans, one of our unique blessings is the fact that we can communicate with words. And these new AI programs, they're based on natural language. So you don't have to learn how to code. You don't have to learn any of this technology. All you got to do is literally talk to it. And so one of the things that I say is instead of trying to like get in front of your laptop or trying to and type the perfect prompt with ChatGPT or any AI language model, what I would say is get your phone out and download one of those AI apps on your phone and then actually talk to it. And it's as simple as like pressing a button like a headphones that then allows you to interact with AI in a conversational mode like you and I are having right now. And all of a sudden, it doesn't matter how old you are. You can have an interaction with it if you can talk. And
Yeah.
so when
Well, that makes me feel a little better. Is there a
so
particular AI app that you would recommend?
I would say, there's 4 or 5 main ones.
Okay.
People know about ChatGPT. Another one is Claude, Claude. Claude is another language model. Claude is a little more eloquent in its writing, whereas ChatGPT is really good for general purpose. You have Perplexity, which is really good for research and shows its links and it shows its resources. And then you've got Gemini from Google. So any of these are fine. They're all basically designed to do the same thing, and they're maybe tweaked a little bit here or there to have a little bit more purpose. And so any of them are really good. Download one of these apps. Make sure, here's a human behavior hack. If you don't see it on your homepage on your phone, you're not going to use the app. Put it on your homepage so that way you see it and it says, okay, I'm going to play around with it. So it doesn't matter how old you are to then be like, okay, I'm actually going to talk to it. And that's what is one of the most important things is that you can interact with AI in a way using natural language, and it just doesn't matter.
Another hack is take 15 minutes of your TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, social media time and use it on this, right? Because we all spend some time watching
Honestly,
those videos. They're fun, but you can
honestly,
take a bit of that time.
here's the other thing I'll say. People think that others are really far ahead in the AI adoption world. And yes, we have some early AI adopters, and we've trained a lot of them. through various AI champion training programs at companies,
Mhm.
but you're really not behind. If you spend honestly like 5 minutes a day over the course of a week, I promise you within 10 weeks, you will become conversationally fluent. We actually have training programs where we teach people 5 minutes a day over the course of a few weeks, you will become conversationally fluent. So it's not too late. We're really just honestly in like the first inning of this new transformation.
I
So
mean,
put down
I would say
TikTok
the
and
same.
pick up AI.
That's encouraging. And I would say the same thing about cultural transformation. I mean, most of our clients are not up in the upper right-hand quadrant. It's 15 or 20%. There's some that are in the quadrant, but not. So yeah, you're not falling behind. You haven't, lost your competitor because your culture isn't there yet. I mean, absolutely, both things are still in early adoption. By the way, Kara has shared a great example. She said at our team meetings, a few people volunteer to share how they're using AI in their jobs. It's really helpful to be able to learn from each other and helps demystify it for those who are newer adopters. Love that example. And by the way, Kara works for Big Speak, the speaker bureau that represents both Kian and I. And so if you need a speaker for an event, they're the ones to go to. We love all
Hi,
our Big Speak
Kara.
friends and family. So thanks, Kara. Love that idea. Um, okay, I'm going to suggest that we kind of move toward the close. Adrian, do we have any last minute questions or something you feel like we should be answering before we move to our close here?
Yeah, a couple other questions came in, Bill. You kind of touched on this, but one of the questions was, what are some strategies for introducing AI into our company and encouraging employees to experiment and learn more about it?
Hmm. You know what I'm going to suggest is let's use AI to go through this webinar and come up with all the suggestions because Kian has made a bunch of great suggestions and actually send that to everyone. Because I do feel like there's a whole bunch of hacks, both around culture and both around adopting AI. Because I mean, in some ways, that's what we have been discussing for the last hour. So I think that's what we should do. I think we should use AI to summarize this meeting.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. And Kian, I mean, any other thoughts on the answer to that question?
I mean, I think a lot of the things we've talked about already, I would say maybe start small. Identify a group of early adopters within your company who are interested and want to lean into it. You can make them your AI champions. It doesn't need to be more than like 10, 15 people. And start small and do a training program to help them learn about some of the best practices in AI literacy. I'd be happy to share any of that information with you guys and then actually measure that over the course of, let's say, a month or two to see
Right.
how their workflow actually changes. And then you can see that, wow, there's actually business value to using AI in work. And then you can start scaling that up slowly by slowly. So you can start with a training program for AI champions. You can start having these lunch and learners. You can really start a variety of things that I think we've already outlined to begin that process.
Yeah, totally agree. And then the last thing I'll say, a little plug, but if you really are focusing on AI adoption, hire Kian, right? He's got some incredible expertise. If kind of the culture shift is kind of the part you're focusing on, that's IHHP's work. So on that topic, and by the way, here's this quote again. I mean, I think this just says it all. If you're not thinking about culture as you're thinking about your AI adoption, you're missing something really critical. Okay, so in closing, what's next? From IHHP, at this website, ihhp.com/BillB, I promise you get a copy of that culture map and an exercise you can do with your team. My business partner and our founder, JP, has a podcast with like podcast called The Last 8% Morning. And then both Key and I are very active on LinkedIn. I'm Bill Benjamin on LinkedIn. And then what did I do with? Oh, Kian, I'm so sorry. I had your slide. And
No
I
worries, no
lost
worries.
that. Oh,
I'll put this information here in chat. If you want to go to this website, learn
yeah,
ABC.
I have it right here. I'm so
All
sorry.
right, no
For
worries.
sure I cut it and pasted it, but
No worries. This is it has all of our research on it, and it gives you some information about training programs. Happy to share with you guys more information if it's of interest. Please feel free to reach out.
here
And
it is. So sorry about that, Kian. There's Kian's information. I was ihhp.com/BillB. And so I just want to, take a picture or write that down if you want to connect with Kian. And like I said, both of us are fairly active on LinkedIn. So in closing, I mean, huge thanks to my team, Adrian, or our team, Adrian and Olivia, for organizing and setting this up. Kian, it's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, to everyone who stayed engaged, and we love the interaction on the chat. You guys are awesome. Please feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions.
Yeah,
Kian?
thanks, Bill, for having me. This was really fun.